Many of us want to know, is the United States on the verge of going to multiple different wars? Is the US military prepared? To help me go through that, I have with me Amber Smith. Amber, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, it's great to be on with you.
So, let me give just a little bit of background for people that may not know you. You are an author, a speaker, a military veteran, a helicopter pilot that did tours, I believe, in Iraq and Afghanistan. I wanted to understand, is the US military that you and I grew up with the same military we see today? Because increasingly I'm reading that generals like Mark Milley and others, they're very concerned about being politically correct, allowing woke ideology to enter in. I'm just wondering, are we able to actually function as a military with this kind of focus?
Yeah, so that's actually, a significant part of why I wrote my book is that the military that I served in um, just doesn't seem to exist anymore, and covering sort of the problems that come with that. But it's what's absolutely alarming is how fast it's changed. I got out of the military in 2010, and the second half of 2010 into the Obama administration. And even from there, seeing how the culture was starting to shift and some policy changes that were being made. And then it was just fast tracked. Like you look at when President Trump came into office, he kind of tried to reverse some of the changes that Obama had made, but then, move forward to the current administration under Biden. And he just held nothing back in terms of executive orders that were being placed on the Department of Defense to sort of implement and prioritize this diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really start to change the priorities within the Department of Defense from making it be a mission focused, mission oriented, readiness, being the priority with accomplishing the mission, into, well, no, DEI is our priority and uniqueness is what we're going to focus on, of the individual, instead of the cohesion and teamwork that's absolutely necessary for an effective military. So there have been some very drastic changes since I was in.
Okay. I don't know if you saw this. It just came out this morning, but I read that Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and Joe Biden are negotiating on a way for U.S. taxpayer dollars to financially support Ukraine for the next 10 years. I also read that Biden's White House legal team is looking for ways to make that unretractable, meaning Trump or any future president over the next 10 years would not be able to unravel this deal of flooding Ukraine with the US taxpayer money. Is the United States spreading itself too thin? Are we abusing the American taxpayer when it comes to sending dollars to these foreign nations?
Yes, to everything that you just said. We are spread too thin. We can't, the United States military, and this is just facts. This isn't like an opinion. The United States military cannot fight Ukraine front, Iran front, China invading Taiwan front. Like that's just a fact. We are not able to be able to handle that right now. And so this obsession with Ukraine has, like, reality has got to come back to Washington, D.C. and foreign policy. And it's really, like, you've heard reports about us depleting our stockpiles, our own military and ammunition stockpiles, because they're being given to Ukraine. And yes, it is absolutely, like, financially bleeding us dry too. You talk about some of the defense budget. There's reports coming out that the Navy is sooner or later going to have to think about cutting back on some of their significant technology modernizations. And it's like, but we're giving billions and tens of billions of dollars, every 6 months to Ukraine. And it's like, where do our priorities lie, right? Like, is it, let's ensure that we have a free and safe America here at home and a military that can protect our freedoms and liberties? Or is it give it all to Ukraine blindly without any sort of an end state. Like, I think where the American people get furious with the mistakes that continue to be made, forever war after forever war, and now we have Ukraine, is it's like, what's the end state? What's the end state that we're looking for? Because you could negotiate a peace deal, as one was in the works until it was sabotaged by the West. And so it's like, where do our priorities lie? Where is this obsession with, revamping the Cold War, which isn't going to be a Cold War? So it's a big problem right now, and there are serious military implications with where our military's at in terms of prioritizing wokeness over mission capabilities.
Yeah, I do wonder, as more information has come out, the Bidens were deeply tied to Ukraine. Donald Trump was actually impeached for investigating that. He's removed from office, and now Biden seems to be willing to give Zelensky everything, including the kitchen sink, in order to keep pushing forward the Biden agenda within Ukraine. It just, I don't know, it makes me suspicious that there's something going on, especially since Biden and Obama were the ones that basically put forward the coup in 2014 that took out the democratically elected leadership in Ukraine in order to have the leadership that the United States wanted in Ukraine.
Yeah, the Ukraine is incredibly corrupt. That's just how it is. The US, the West has had their hand in it, like you said, for a decade plus now. And the fact that you see the reports coming out that the Biden administration, working with Congress, trying to prevent sort of any change to policy or funding for the next 10 years and solidifying it. So regardless of who takes over in office, like removing that authority and that power from them, that has got to be shut down. You cannot remove power from a future president when it comes to, anything. They're elected by the people, not former President Biden and his ambitions for a future Ukraine. And so people are going to need to stay informed about that, because that's like entering very, very dangerous waters. And we're talking about, playing with fire with the biggest nuclear power in the world. And sadly, what it comes down to with war often is egos in Washington, D.C. that cannot, they're not sending their sons and daughter. They're not risking them serving in the military on the chance of that somewhere down the line, which it is a possibility that the United States does get involved, because the war continues to escalate, because no one in the West wants to move forward with a peace deal. They just want to continue to push this war in Ukraine. And I think everybody thinks that Ukraine has a right to defend itself. The issue arises that we don't have to do it for them, and we don't have to fund it. We don't have to fund a proxy war and spend all of our money when we can't even get a border wall and close the border on our southern border. And we don't need to deplete our own military resources and assets to do so. And it's being viewed as like, why is the United States being this aggressive with it? Ukraine is not a member of NATO.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the other thing is, you mentioned the American people don't want these forever wars. Afghanistan was 20 years, trillions of dollars. Literally, I don't think that we got any benefit from that. And yet now they're trying to set up another decade-long war that, like you said, a president can't unravel or make intervention on. It just, the whole thing seems a little suspicious. On top of that, U.S. taxpayers have now put forward $200 billion for this Russia-Ukraine war. Putin is now 15% larger than he was when it started. The Ukraine military is decimated, and Russia has taken 20% of Ukraine's landmass. So is this even a winnable war? And would Biden define this as winning? It, to me, it just feels like throwing good money after bad, and yet the American taxpayer gets thrown under the bus all the time.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a narrative that was pushed that isn't true. You think about the beginning of the war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was Russia's military is about to collapse. You heard that for the longest time, that they were fighting with equipment from the 1980s, and it was going to be like the attrition rate for the Russian military was like astronomical, and they were never going to be able to sustain any type of a war. And that's just false. That is absolutely not true. Just as you mentioned, pretty much everything has happened in the exact opposite. They've stopped using the dollar with almost all all relationships with China and our other adversaries. They've grown stronger. What is the Russian military getting right now that the United States military is not? They are getting absolutely priceless experience in modern warfare. And the United States is not. We're sending equipment to Ukraine. And so you have, certain parts of the Ukrainian military getting that experience, but the United States military is not. And that's something that is, and trust me, I'm not like, the United States does not need to be involved in this. They need to de-escalate and take a step back. But I'm pointing to the fact that the United States and their strategy has essentially strengthened the Russian military. And the United States is just kind of sitting back watching. It's a proxy war, letting somebody else do the fighting, but they are getting the experience. And so right now, the United States military has experience from 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, that is now over. So all of their experience and expertise is from a war that is no more. Who has experience now in modern war fighting, the way wars are currently being fought right now?
Yeah.
Russia.
Yeah. Let's bring it home. In the last week, several military whistleblowers came forward with connection to the Washington, D.C. National Guard field office, stating on record and under oath that their units were ready to deploy and break up the January 6th protest, but they were told to stand down by higher ups for over 2 hours while the chaos and breaking into the Capitol actually ramped up. Why would the military and the National Guard be told to stand down on purpose? To me, this looks like a redo of Benghazi, where Hillary Clinton wouldn't allow the military to go in and do their job, and then it ends up being a fiasco.
Yeah, just from not hearing too much about this just yet, it sounds to me like, yes, very poor leadership decisions, someone not being willing to make the decision to send people in and kind of shut it down, and just standing back and kind of watching. And sadly, we see that, like, some people are terrified to make decisions in leadership positions. And so, I mean, unfortunately, like, it sounds like some really bad decision making.
Yeah. Okay, final question that I want to hear about your book is CNN, of all news outlets, just broke a major story that's getting almost no attention on how the US military, the Pentagon, and even the White House are lying to the American people about the suicide blast that killed 13 soldiers at the Abbey Gate during the Afghanistan withdrawal. We now have video proof that more was going on, more shots fired. Why would Biden and the Pentagon try to cover up this failed exit?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that this should be getting more press than it is. And sadly, I think it's because the Biden administration just wants it to go away. They wanted it to go away, the second that it happened. And we saw that with the narrative push, that they were boldly trying to, tell the American people what a success the evacuation was. And it's like, we live in the age of like instantaneous communication and media. We saw it with our own eyes. There was nothing successful about it. But it just, if you look back on how they handled the withdraw and the evacuation, I'm not surprised at all. And even the war, bigger picture, look at how they handled the war, and look at the lack of truth surrounding the reality of the war on the ground. And then versus senior leaders coming to Washington, D.C. and testifying on Capitol Hill that the war was going well, that, you know, the Afghan military was very capable. And then fast forward to the evacuation, when the U.S. military droned and killed 10 innocent people, and then for weeks said that it was an ISIS-K member, and there was a secondary explosion, and they said that there was explosives in the car, and that's what the secondary explosion was. And it wasn't until, you know, General Milley said that it was a righteous strike, and ended up weeks later, wasn't until the New York Times reported that it was actually an aid worker and 7 of his children and family that were killed. And the secondary explosion was a propane tank that was next to where the white vehicle was parked. So they will take it and run with it as long as the media allows them to. So I think they're likely waiting for the story to die down and just hope nobody ever questions it again. And that's how they get away with things.
Yeah. Okay, tell me about your book, Unfit to Fight. What are we going to learn? What's in the book?
So my book, Unfit to Fight: How Woke Policies Are Destroying Our Military, is about the sort of leadership crisis at the military right now that has resulted in this downward spiral in the military. And we're seeing that in everything from recruiting numbers, not being able to recruit people to join the military anymore, the retention crisis, not being able to keep people who are currently involved, who have priceless experience serving and fighting in wars. And then morale crisis as well inside the ranks. And you hear this from people who are serving and are just absolutely miserable in the way that the military has shifted from this war fighting machine that prioritizes training, readiness, and being able to accomplish the mission, to sort of this woke indoctrination institution that focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, ensuring that you have the right pronouns in your bio, changing everything to be extremely gender neutral, pushing transgender policies, allowing biological men to change their gender on their ID card, and then they shower and use the same locker room as women, lowering of standards, double standards, two-tier justice system. I could go on and on about the issues inside the military, but it is alarming about how bad it has gotten and how it's affected the troops and the ability to accomplish their mission, and some of the national security threats and consequences that come with it.
Okay, well, I'm excited for people to read that. I'll be doing an interview with a military doctor here on the COVID forced vaccine mandates, and she was telling me about how the military is losing pilots like yourself at a rate they've never seen before. People that they put $3, $4, $5 million of education and training into, and the people are just like, nope, we're done. We can't deal with this anymore. It's unfortunate. So the book is coming out. I want to put a direct link so that people can go get that. But Amber, if people want to follow you online and continue to be involved with you and the information you're putting out, what is the best way for them to do that?
On Instagram and Twitter, I'm at Amber Smith USA, and you can head over to my website to find everything else. You can order signed copies of my book and more, officialambersmith.com.
Okay, I will put those down below. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your service to our country. I know that you had many successful missions during your tour time. So thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.